So if we take a look at our scene, we have these reflective, emissive lights that are grouped across the entire ceiling. We can see here that they're a perfect grid all the way down, which if they're cloned in the same objects, that means we can instance them. But if we were going to try to drag these out one by one across our entire ceiling, it's going to take a really long time. So I think this is a good opportunity to try to replicate these using blueprints. So if you go to the UE VFX folder, go to Assets and then Ceiling Tiles, I prepared this really simple texture. It's just a white texture with a little bit of broken up information on it and a black edge, just like our references. And we're going to use this to create our ceiling tiles. So first things first, let's create a cube and drag it into our scene. So let's make a material for this cube and let's call it mm ceiling tile 01. And let's create a very simple master material here. So if we take our texture and we drag it into our scene, that'll automatically create a texture sample inside of our material graph. And the main things we want to do here is make this emissive. So I'm going to plug our RGB into the emissive color, and I'm also going to plug it into the base color. Now if we save that, and if you're editing a master material and you want to see it update in your scene, you have to either save it or hit apply every single time. Which is another reason why material instances are nice, because you don't necessarily need to save them to see your changes. But now let's take our master material and we can drag it onto our object here, and we can see, great, now we have black edges on the corners, and if we preview this as a cube, we'll see the same exact thing over here. So one thing I'm going to add is I'm going to drag off of our texture sample, and when you look here, you're going to see all these different menus, and it seems like there's so many. Again, at the end of the day, there's only a couple that we're going to use, so I'll make sure to point out all of the ones that are most commonly used, and a lot of them are just simple math nodes like multiply, subtract, add, or divide. So in this case, I'm going to multiply this by 2, and we press apply. So one thing I'm going to do, let me just hide our light source for now, and it'll actually make this cube emissive. So it's emissive because our scene has lumen enabled, and lumen is what casts the lights and gives us these really nice reflections around our scene. You can see that it will even appear in the reflections of the puddle if we place it in the right place. So we get a nice reflection there. And now if I set this to something like 0.2, we'll make it darker because we're multiplying it by a value that's much lower. And you can see it has a direct effect on the brightness and how much light is cast into our scene. So again, this is our master material, the template that we're creating. If you want to take a master material and create a material instance from it, all you have to do is right-click a master material and hit Create Material Instance. By default, it'll add _inst to the end of your node, but if we want to keep our naming convention, we'll swap out mm for mi for material instance, and then let's open that up and hit Save. And you can see here, we don't have any settings. These are just asking what our parent material is, but we don't actually have anything that we can edit in here like we did with our Quixel master materials. So we need to set up some basic parameters so that they'll show up inside of our material instance so that we can edit it on the fly. So let's just apply this material instance to this cube, but let's make sure to click our master material because that's what we want to edit. So if we need to see that, every material instance has a parent, and you can just double click that to open up the template that it's based off of. So if we wanted to create a brightness setting, what we have to do is we have to create a parameter. So we can drag this off and type in parameter, and it'll give us a ton of different options here. But the most common ones are scalar parameters, and we can type in brightness. And a scalar parameter is just a number, and specifically, it's a floating point number. All that floating point means is that it has a decimal afterwards, whereas an integer is a thing where you don't have any decimals. So this will come into play in a bit, but all you need to know for now is that it's a scalar parameter. Scalar means one number. So if you multiply anything by 1, it'll just be itself. So let's set this to 1 by default, and let's hit save. And now let's go back to our material instance. And now we'll have this brightness global scalar parameter that we can adjust. So now we can drag this up or down, and we can see that now that I've, made it 1,000 times brighter, it's casting a lot more light into our scene. You know, when you do these very extreme values, it will start to break lumens. So just be conscious of that. So let's set it back down to 10 instead of 100. And you can see, okay, yeah, it's making a pretty big difference inside of our scene. And we could also set it to something low, like 0.1. So that's a scalar parameter. It's just up or down. The other type of parameter, if we right click here, is going to be a vector parameter. So a vector parameter is, instead of one value, we get 3. It's nice to think of a vector as an R, G, and B image, 3 vectors, RGB. It has the option of being 4. And now let's set our default value to 1. So we'll drag this value up to 1. Now if we press save here, we'll get a new parameter in our material instance. So brightness will now be gone, and it'll be replaced by color, because now the brightness isn't connected, the color is. So now we have a color parameter, and now we can start to tint this into any color, and you can see it will also have the same effect on our scene. It'll cast a different color light into our scene once Lumen catches up with how we've changed it. And specifically what's happening is this R, G, and B, these 3 numbers, are being multiplied by this image's 3 RGB values. And if you desaturate a vector, it'll act the same way as our single floating point scalar number. And then you just bring the value slider up or down. But let's just set this back to 1 and start building our blueprint.